Doris Piserchia. The ability to see the other dimensional rings that float in Earth's atmosphere was a late mutation of a few space-age humans. Daryl was under the care of the Institution for Muters, and she had discovered that if you jumped through the right ring at the right time, it would land you in another dimensional world and another shape. Spaceling is the story of Daryl's desperate efforts to unravel the mystery of why she was being held captive and what was really going on in a certain alien dimension, because she was sure it was all bad and that someday everyone would thank her for the revelation. But instead, everyone was engaged in a wild effort to hold her down, to keep her on this Earth, and to keep the world simply intact. It's a fast and furious escapade of a future Huck Finn, female gender, by the author of Earthchild. So I'm here today to talk about the dangers of egg rolls. Not just any egg rolls, mind you. I am sure most egg rolls are as safe as they are delicious when prepared properly at a restaurant and served fresh. I would think the key here is that the egg rolls should be served fresh. My daughter and a friend of hers recently stopped at a gas station convenience store for a snack, specifically the Mart at the Superdrive along the highway. I'm sure you can see where this is going. Fortunately, my daughter selected chocolate milk, but her friend Dinah wanted something a little more substantial. She walked past the refrigerated options like cheese curds, meat sticks, and hard-boiled eggs to examine the menu under the heat lamps like hot dogs, pizza, and, of course, egg rolls. Or actually, there were not egg rolls plural, there was just one egg roll under the heat lamp. My daughter says it looked decidedly unhealthy. She won't go so far as to say it was green, but it had a hue, like a shadow within, just under its greasy skin. She pointed it out to her friend, which she now regrets terribly. She said, "Look at that. How long do you think it's been sitting here?" And Dinah looked. Dinah had not yet found something to eat. "It looks gross." That's what my daughter said. Dinah looked again. There was a sparkle in her eye. Now you have to understand that my daughter and her friend are at an age where attention itself can sometimes be confused for approbation, which of course can be extrapolated sociologically and historically as the inspiration of any number of cultural evolutions. In brief, Dinah bought the egg roll, which she then ate right outside the Mart without due care for the warning signs. These signs should have included the sight, the smell, the texture, and the flavor itself of the roll. My daughter says the roll was not crispy, but soft and wet looking. The insides were unidentifiable, gelatinous, although they did have the colors one might expect of very old cabbage and shrimp. Dinah did not seem to notice anything, and that's because she was enjoying her friend's reactions so much, that is, my daughter's disgust. And Dinah even went so far as to savor the food, making sounds as though the food were excessively delicious. Afterward, she did complain that the egg roll had been gross, but it seemed as though she was going to be all right. The rest of the day passed normally, although Dinah did occasionally burp unpleasantly. These grew larger as the day wore on, and my daughter says she was actually relieved when Dinah had to go home. At one point, Dinah actually erupted with a large, wet-sounding belch which filled the room with the smell, something like the metallic tang and rot of a garbage truck. My daughter didn't see her friend the next day at school, so she only learned later what happened next. Dinah grew increasingly unwell. Her stomach distended and her intestines churned. It felt to her like there were worms in her bowels or maggots. However, she could not use the bathroom, no matter how much she tried. Sometime in the middle of the night, after an evening spent twisting and turning and crying for her parents, who could do nothing for her and who felt every instant as if they should take their daughter to the hospital, although she had no fever and no other symptoms except very bad belly pains, which could have been attributed to gas and cramps. Sometime in the middle of the night, after her parents finally went to bed, Dinah sat straight up, and finally she threw up. I've heard this described as projectile vomiting, although I'm thankful I've never experienced it. There was a minute, at least, then, when she just sat in her bed, unmoving. Her hands were resting on her lap, covered in a wet and chunky puddle. She expected her parents to come running, but apparently they hadn't heard her. She called tentatively, once or twice, but then suddenly her cries grew louder, frantic. She was in the dark, so she could not see, but she felt something. Something was squirming in the puddle on her lap, and it had squirmed across her hands. A second later, her parents were in the room. They flipped on the light. They jumped into action, her mom helping her daughter to the bathroom while Dad gathered up the soggy bed coverings and cleaned up the room. It took several minutes for Dinah to gain the coherence to describe what she had felt, but of course at that point nothing could be found. And anyway, it just seemed very likely that Dinah had imagined it. Dinah felt much better by the morning, although she took a day off from school because she was exhausted. Over the next few days, her life got back to normal. She had learned a lesson, blah, blah, blah. End of story. But no. It was about 2 weeks later, just a few days ago now, when Dinah and her family noticed that the family cat was behaving strangely. They could sometimes hear it hiss when it was in another room, or growl, but when they checked on it, they could find nothing but the cat itself, very jumpy. The cat avoided its food bowl, but every morning the food had been eaten. The cat seemed to be losing weight. They decided to take it to the vet, so off went Dad to the basement to find the cat carrier. He was in one of the far corners of the basement where the light bulb only projected a kind of shapeless gray light, which made objects appear unusual, when he heard, from upstairs, a scream. He grabbed a spade as he ran upstairs, and there he saw his daughter behind his wife, armed with a paring knife, and their cat in front of her, glaring flat-eared up at a snake, or a giant worm, or some kind of very large larva. He couldn't remember thinking at all. He brought the shovel down on the thing and smashed it, right there in the middle of the floor. So anyway, and to make a long story short, Dinah's family is now staying at a hotel. The house has been fumigated. 3 more of the things have been found, dead from the fumigation. Dinah's family is unsure of when they'll move back, though, because the exterminator, a fellow named Carl, said he saw enough trace for at least a dozen of the things. He says the house is probably safe, though, because it looks like the things escaped into the yard. There's holes down there in the basement. That's where they probably went. He says he'd be happy to seal up the holes for a few dollars more. There's holes down there in the basement. That's where they probably went.